Hey guys, tonight we close our eyes and find ourselves not in a grand throne room, but in the quiet, sun-drenched halls of an Egyptian royal nursery. We're going to explore the life of a pharaoh, but from its very beginning. Imagine a world where your crib is draped in the finest linen, where the toys you hold are crafted from ivory and gold, and where your every breath is a matter of state security. It's a life of unimaginable privilege, but also one where the expectations are so high and the dangers so unique that you probably wouldn't survive this childhood without some serious divine intervention. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd also love to see where in the world you're listening from tonight and what time it is for you, so drop a comment below. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing you are aware of is not a mother's gentle cooing, but a low, resonant chanting. You are born into a world of gold and whispers. The air in the royal birthing chamber is thick with the scent of kifi, a complex incense of myrrh, juniper, and honey that is meant to purify the space and welcome a divine soul. Your first cries are not met with simple joy, but with a collective, reverent hush from the priests and midwives in attendance. You are not just a baby. You are a Horus in waiting, a living God poured into a tiny, fragile human form. From your very first moments, you are separate. While other Egyptian infants are swaddled and held close, you are handled with a kind of careful, fearful respect. Your wet nurse, a woman of the highest noble blood, is likely chosen as much for her political connections as for her ability to provide nourishment. When she holds you, there is a distance in her eyes. She is feeding a deity, not just her charge. It's a subtle thing, but you feel it in the way you are never quite squeezed, never jostled with the easy affection given to a normal child. Your nursery is a gilded cage. Sunlight, thick with golden dust motes, streams through high, clear-story windows, illuminating intricate paintings on the walls. These aren't charming animals or simple patterns. They are scenes of God's anointing past pharaohs, of your father smiting Egypt's enemies, of the perilous journey the soul must take through the underworld. These are your bedtime stories, a constant, silent reminder of the cosmic weight that rests on your impossibly small shoulders. Your toys, scattered on a reed mat, are beautiful but heavy. A small, perfectly carved wooden chariot, a hippo made of blue faience, a doll with jointed limbs. But there are no other children here to share them with. Your siblings, if you have them, are in their own separate, sanctified worlds, and the children of courtiers are kept far away. You cannot risk contamination, either by common disease or by common thought. Your playdates are less about sharing toys and more about assessing the loyalty of a provincial governor's son. Standard toddler stuff. As you grow, this isolation solidifies. Your most defining feature is the sidelock of youth, a long, thick braid of hair that hangs down one side of your head, the rest of your scalp kept shaved and smooth. This is the mark of childhood, a symbol worn by all princely children. It's a constant physical reminder of your status, and it will only be cut off on the day you become a man. You feel its weight when you run, a gentle tug at your temple, a sign that you are still in a state of becoming. Your education begins almost as soon as you can walk and talk. There is no gentle introduction to learning. Your tutors are the most powerful men in the kingdom besides your father. The high priest of Ammonius, the vizier, the top military general. They enter your chambers with a solemnity that chills the warm air. They bow deeply, their faces unreadable, before beginning their lessons. Forget learning your ABCs. You're memorizing the 42 negative confessions, a list of sins you must swear you haven't committed to enter the afterlife, before you've even lost your first baby tooth. It really puts homework into perspective. You learn to read and write, not on cheap ostraca, the broken pottery shards used by common scribes, but on fresh, clean sheets of papyrus. The hieroglyphs are a language of gods and kings, and mastering their thousands of intricate forms is the work of a lifetime. You learn statecraft, studying treaties with the Hittites and the Nubians. You learn military strategy, poring over maps of desert trade routes and fortress locations. You learn theology, committing to memory the sprawling, often contradictory family trees of the gods. And you learn magic, or Heka, the fundamental force that underpins creation. You are taught the spells that command the weather, heal the sick, and most importantly, protect the pharaoh from the forces of chaos. There is no recess. There is no free time. Even your leisure is structured and purposeful. You practice archery in a palace courtyard, your small hands struggling to draw the bowstring, your tutor murmuring corrections about your stance. You learn to drive a chariot, a terrifying ordeal of speed and balance, with a guardsman running alongside to ensure you don't topple the golden vehicle. You play Senet, the most popular board game in Egypt, but your games are lessons in strategy and foresight. Each move on the 30-square board represents a step in the journey towards the afterlife, a constant, low-humming reminder of your ultimate purpose. Your health is a matter of national security, and the methods for protecting it are peculiar. Amulets are sewn into the seams of your linen kilts, lapis lazuli for royal power, carnelian for courage, and the ubiquitous eye of Horus for protection. Spells are whispered over your food and water to nullify any poison. But when you inevitably get sick, the royal physicians approach with a strange mix of divine reverence and deeply questionable science. For a cough, you might be given a concoction of honey and dates mixed with a finely ground-up mouse. Because nothing says get well soon like a rodent-based remedy. It's a bold choice, let's just leave it at that. This is a very real aspect of Egyptian medicine, where magical ingredients were considered just as potent as herbal ones. The line between a prayer and a prescription is almost non-existent. Beneath the weight of all this training and ritual, you are still a child. You might have moments of quiet rebellion, hiding from a tutor behind a grand pillar, or secretly feeding a piece of your sanctified bread to a palace cat. But these moments are fleeting. The pressure is immense, a constant, ambient force. You see the way the guards stiffen when you walk by, the way servants avert their eyes, the way your own father, the living God, looks at you not just with paternal affection, but with the critical eye of a king assessing his heir. Historians still argue whether a young prince fully grasped the concept of his own divinity, or if it was a heavy, confusing costume he was forced to wear until he grew into it. Did you truly believe you were a god, or did you sometimes lie awake on your wooden headrest, listening to the chirping of geckos on the wall, and feel a profound and terrifying loneliness? You are surrounded by people, yet utterly alone. You are the most important child in the world, yet you have no friends. Your future is a path of unimaginable power, but it has been paved for you, every single stone set in place by millennia of tradition. You have no choice but to walk it. The disturbing truth of your childhood isn't about physical hardship, but about the complete absence of freedom, the crushing weight of being a symbol long before you have figured out how to be a person. Your life is a script, and you are just learning the lines. The day your sidelock of youth is cut is the day your childhood officially ends. It happens in a solemn ceremony, the braided strand of hair that has defined your youth laid upon an altar as an offering. A priest with a bronze knife performs the deed. The feeling is one of strange lightness on the side of your head, immediately replaced by a much greater weight. Your father, the Horus, has flown to the horizon, joining the imperishable stars. Now it is your turn. The coronation is less a celebration and more a grueling, multi-day ordeal of cosmic significance. You are led, barefoot and clad in simple white linen, through a series of purification rituals. Priests pour cool, consecrated water from the Nile over your head, chanting litanies to wash away any remaining trace of the mortal boy you once were. You are anointed with sacred oils, the scent of lotus and frankincense clinging to your skin, sealing you as a divine vessel. Finally, you are brought to the throne. You receive the regalia of kingship one by one. The crook, a shepherd's staff, symbolizes your role as the gentle guide of your people. The flail, a rod with hanging beads, represents your authority and power to compel them. Then come the crowns. First, the white crown of Upper Egypt, the hedjet, tall and conical. Then the red crown of Lower Egypt, the dishret, with its distinctive curl. Finally, a priest lifts the skent, the double crown, where the two are combined. He places it on your head. It is heavy, heavier than you imagined. The gold and precious metals press down, a constant, physical reminder of the burden of unifying and protecting two lands. You are no longer a prince. You are the lord of the two lands, the high priest of every temple, the living Horus. Your new life is one of relentless, suffocating routine. The sun has not yet begun to pale the eastern sky when you are awakened. It is not a gentle rousing, but a formal summons. A retinue of priests enters your chambers, their bare feet silent on the stone floor. They are the Horkuri Wajeb, the Lectector priests, and their first task is to ritually purify your sleeping form. They chant spells of protection as you rise, your body still stiff with sleep. You are led to a chamber known as the House of the Morning. Here, your divine toilette begins. This is not about getting ready for the day. It is the daily act of recreating the god. Two sets of servants attend to you. One set is for your right side, representing Upper Egypt, and the other for your left, Lower Egypt. You are washed again with sanctified water, your mouth rinsed with natron-laced liquid. You are less a person and more a cult statue being prepared for display. You stand impassively as they dress you in a kilt of the finest pleated linen, so white it seems to glow in the lamplight. They drape you in jewelry, heavy pectorals of gold and lapis lazuli, broad collars of carnelian and turquoise, armlets and bracelets that feel cool and restrictive on your skin. Then comes the makeup. A priest, using a delicate stylus of ivory, carefully applies thick, black kohl around your eyes. This is not for vanity. It is believed to ward off eye infections and, more importantly, to protect you from the evil eye. The dramatic, winged shape is meant to mimic the markings of the falcon god Horus, whose living embodiment you are. Green malachite powder is sometimes dusted on your lids. You are now a perfect, divine image. Your first official duty of every single day is to the gods. You, and you alone, are the bridge between the mortal world and the divine realm. In theory, you are the high priest of every single temple in Egypt, from the grand complex at Karnak to the smallest local shrine. While in practice you delegate these duties to thousands of priests, the most important rituals can theoretically only be performed by you. You walk from the palace to the temple in a solemn procession. The air is cool, the stone under your sandals still holding the night's chill. The public sees only a glimpse of you, a flash of gold and white, before you disappear into the sacred precinct. Inside the temple's inner sanctum, a place of deep, echoing silence, you come face to face with the cult statue of the god, perhaps Ammonius Ra, Ptah, or Horus himself. The statue, made of gold and precious stone, is housed in a small shrine. You perform the opening of the mouth ceremony, a ritual that allows the god's spirit to inhabit the statue, to see, hear, and eat. You symbolically break the clay seal on the shrine doors, revealing the deity. You present it with offerings, bread, beer, cuts of meat, wine, and linen. You waft incense before its impassive face, cleansing the air. You are feeding and clothing a god so that he, in turn, will continue to sustain the world. It is a quiet, lonely, and repetitive task, but the fate of the cosmos depends on it. Historians still argue whether pharaohs, especially during the powerful New Kingdom, performed this exhaustive ritual daily, or if a high priest served as a stand-in, acting with the pharaoh's authority. Either way, the responsibility was yours. From the temple, you proceed to the great audience hall. Here, the divine being becomes a bureaucrat. You sit on a high, gilded throne, often under a canopy, your feet resting on a footstool decorated with the images of Egypt's 9 traditional enemies. This way, you are literally trampling your foes with every moment you sit. Your vizier, the most powerful official in the land, sits at your feet, ready to present the day's business. You must listen to legal disputes between nobles, hear reports from regional governors on the height of the Nile's inundation, and dictate responses to letters from foreign kings. It's all terribly important, but also crushingly dull. One moment you're communing with the sun god, the next you're settling a property line dispute that has been dragging on for 3 generations. The whiplash is considerable. Through it all, you must maintain a perfect, emotionless facade. You cannot look bored. You cannot look angry. You cannot look amused. You are the incarnation of Ma'at, the cosmic principle of truth, justice, order, and harmony. Your every judgment must be flawless, your every expression serene. Your job is to hold back Isfit, the force of chaos that constantly threatens to unmake the world. A bad harvest, a plague, a military defeat. These are not just unfortunate events. They are signs that your personal connection to the gods is failing, that Ma'at is weakening on your watch. The pressure is unimaginable. Every decision, no matter how small, has cosmic implications. There's a particular, quirky ritual documented where the pharaoh had to circumambulate and alter a precise number of times to ensure a specific blessing. Get the count wrong, and you might have accidentally cursed the barley harvest instead of blessing it. No pressure. This is your life now. A continuous, unbroken cycle of ritual and responsibility. From waking to sleeping, your time is not your own. You are the property of the gods and the state. You move from one solemn duty to the next, a prisoner of your own divinity. The vibrant, chaotic world of ordinary people. The laughter in the marketplace, the gossip by the village well, the simple joy of an unplanned afternoon, is as foreign to you as the lands of the distant Mitanni. You are the sun, and your path is fixed in the sky. It is glorious, it is essential, but it is also a profoundly lonely and unchanging journey. Your public life is one of divine perfection, a carefully choreographed performance of power and serenity. But behind the painted palace walls, in the private royal quarters, the reality of your family life is far more complicated and deeply unsettling. The most sacred duty of a pharaoh, after maintaining Ma'at, is to produce an heir. And the perceived best way to ensure the purity of the divine bloodline is to keep it all in the family. Your wife is not a foreign princess chosen for a strategic alliance, nor a beautiful noblewoman who caught your eye. She is, most likely, your sister, or perhaps your half-sister. In some cases, a pharaoh might even marry his own daughter. To the ancient Egyptians, this was not a taboo. It was a sacred imitation of the gods. The god Osiris married his sister Isis, and together they produced Horus, the divine model for all pharaohs. By marrying your sister, you are not committing an act of incest. You are reinforcing the divinity of your children, ensuring that the blood of the gods runs as undiluted as possible. Your relationship with your great royal wife, your sister, is less about love and more about dynasty. There is an affection, born of a shared, strange upbringing in the gilded cage of the palace, but it is a bond of partners in a cosmic enterprise. You see her across the banquet table, adorned in her own regalia, a priestess and a political power in her own right. Your conversations are about the succession, about the loyalty of a certain courtier, about which of your many children shows the most promise. There is little room for simple human connection when your spouse is also your sibling and your business partner in the family firm of running the universe. Of course, you have other wives, many other wives. A sprawling royal harem is a symbol of the pharaoh's power and virility. These are the daughters of powerful Egyptian nobles, sent to court to secure their family's influence. They are also foreign princesses from places like Babylonia, Mitanni, and the land of the Hittites, sent as part of diplomatic treaties, living, breathing seals on an international agreement. They live in a separate palace compound, a luxurious but highly controlled environment. It is a world of its own, with its own hierarchy, its own politics, and its own simmering tensions. While you might visit them, your primary duty and main heir will almost always come from your great royal wife, your royal sister. This complex family structure is a breeding ground for conspiracy. While you sit on the throne, radiating divine calm, your court is a viper's nest of ambition and jealousy. A minor wife from the harem might dream of her son becoming pharaoh instead of the heir apparent. A powerful courtier, like the master of the horse or the royal chancellor, might see an opportunity to install a more pliable ruler on the throne. Perhaps a young, easily manipulated prince. The whispers start in the shadowed corners of the harem, in the barracks of the royal guard, in the offices of the scribes. Plots are hatched, alliances are formed, and the threat of betrayal is constant. The harem conspiracy against Ramesses III is a famous historical example of this very real danger. Legal documents from his reign, known as the Judicial Papyrus of Turin, detail a plot hatched by one of his secondary wives, a woman named Tai, to assassinate him and place her son, Pentar, on the throne. The conspiracy was wide-ranging, involving high-ranking officials, harem women, and even sorcerers who created magical wax figures to curse you and your loyal guards. They got close. While Ramesses III ultimately survived the initial attempt, forensic analysis of his mummy suggests his throat was slit, meaning he likely died from his wounds shortly after the plot was foiled. Imagine that. You are a living god, a master of the universe, and your greatest threat comes from within your own home, from a plot fueled by jealousy and black magic. It's the ultimate celestial workplace drama. Then there is the matter of your health, and the very primitive nature of royal healthcare. Despite your divine status, you are still painfully human. You get toothaches, you break bones, you suffer from disease. The royal physicians do their best, but their best is a strange and often terrifying blend of practical knowledge, magic, and guesswork. We know from studying royal mummies that pharaohs suffered from a host of ailments. Many had terrible dental problems, abscesses, worn-down teeth from the grit and sand in their bread, and painful infections. King Amenhotep III was elderly and obese, suffering from excruciating dental issues that likely caused a systemic infection that killed him. And the royal bloodline you work so hard to keep pure. Generations of inbreeding have taken their toll. The famed Tutankhamun is a perfect case study. Genetic analysis of his mummy has revealed a slew of congenital problems. He had a clubfoot, forcing him to walk with a cane, over 130 of which were found in his tomb. He suffered from choler disease, a rare bone disorder, and had a cleft palate. He was also riddled with malaria. This was the boy king, the golden image of a pharaoh, but in reality, he was a physically frail young man, a product of a family tree that had more of a wreath-like shape. His father was Akhenaten, and his mother was one of Akhenaten's sisters, now known as the Younger Lady. He himself married his half-sister, Enkesenamen. This genetic legacy, once thought to be a source of divine strength, was in reality a crippling weakness. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians themselves recognized the negative physical consequences of royal incest. Did they see the clubfoot and the cleft palate as signs of divine uniqueness, or did they worry in private that something was going wrong? We have no texts that explicitly criticize the practice, as it was so central to their concept of divine kingship. But they could see the results. When you look at your own children, do you see the perfect continuation of a divine line, or do you see a frail boy who struggles to walk, a daughter who is often sick? Do you ever wonder if the wisdom of the gods includes a subscription to a basic genetics textbook? Probably not, but you might have your doubts. Even a simple injury could be a death sentence. A cut from a hunting accident could become infected. A fall from a chariot could lead to a compound fracture that would never heal properly. There are no antibiotics, no sterile surgical theaters. There are only linen bandages, honey, which has some antiseptic properties, and a whole lot of chanting. A particularly quirky medical treatment prescribed for blindness involved mashing up a pig's eye, mixing it with red ochre, and pouring it into the patient's ear. One can only imagine the success rate of that particular cure. It's a stark reminder that beneath the gold and the grandeur, your existence is fragile. You are surrounded by threats, the assassin's knife, the conspirator's poison, a royal toothache, and the very genes that make you king. From the moment you ascend the throne, even as you project an image of timeless, eternal power, you are obsessed with your own death. This is not a morbid fascination. It is the single most important project of your reign. Your life on Earth, even if it lasts for 60 or 70 years, is just a brief, transient phase. Your true existence, your eternal life among the gods, is what truly matters. And preparing for that journey is a monumental undertaking that will consume vast resources, decades of labor, and your constant, personal attention. Your tomb is not just a burial place. It is your mansion of eternity, a resurrection machine. The work begins almost immediately. Your chief architect and vizier present you with plans. You are not building a simple grave. You are commissioning a grand, sprawling complex that must function as a gateway to the afterlife. For the pharaohs of the Old Kingdom, this meant a pyramid, a colossal stone mountain designed to serve as a stairway to the heavens. For you, a new kingdom pharaoh, the style has changed. The pyramids proved to be magnificent, unmissable beacons for tomb robbers. So the new fashion is secrecy. Your tomb will be carved deep into the rock of a desolate, sun-blasted valley on the west bank of the Nile, opposite the city of Thebes, a place we now call the Valley of the Kings. The site is chosen for its symbolic geography. The west, where the sun sets, is the land of the dead. The valley itself is watched over by a natural, pyramid-shaped peak known as Ta Dehent, or the Peak, which you and your people see as a sacred, protective symbol. The location is remote, hot, and easily guarded. An entire village of specialized workers, at a place now called Deir el-Medina, is established nearby. These are the stone cutters, the plasterers, the scribes, and the master artists who will spend their entire lives toiling in the dark to create your eternal home. They are a state secret, their village isolated to protect the location of your tomb. You approve the plans, and the work begins. It is a slow, arduous process. A team of quarriers, their bodies gleaming with sweat under the brutal desert sun, begins by cutting a small, dark opening into the limestone cliff face. For years, sometimes for decades, they will chip away at the rock with bronze chisels and stone dolerite pounders. They work by the faint, flickering light of oil lamps with salt-laced wicks to reduce the smoke. The air is thick with limestone dust, a fine, choking powder that coats their skin and fills their lungs. They excavate a long, descending corridor, sometimes hundreds of feet long, punctuated by staircases and antechambers. You visit the site periodically. The journey itself is a grand procession. You cross the Nile on your royal barge, leaving the bustling life of Thebes behind for the silent, waiting land of the West. As you inspect the progress, you are no longer just a king, you are a project manager. You walk through the cool, dark passages, the sound of your sandals echoing off the rough-hewn walls. You discuss the angle of a corridor with your architect, ensuring it aligns with certain constellations. You confer with the master artists about the decorative scheme. Every inch of the tomb's walls must be covered in magical texts and images designed to protect and guide you on your journey. This is where the true artistry begins. Once the corridors and chambers are cut, a layer of plaster is applied to smooth the rough limestone walls. Then, the master draftsmen move in. Using red ochre, they sketch out the intricate scenes and hieroglyphs. You review these drafts, making sure every detail is correct. This is the sacred literature of the underworld. Texts like the Book of Gates, the Amjuat, and the Litany of Ra. These are not just decorations. They are a user's manual for the afterlife. The Amjuat, for instance, is a detailed hour-by-hour guide to the sun god Ra's nightly journey through the underworld, which you, as the deceased pharaoh, will join. It's filled with maps, lists of demons you'll encounter, and the magic spells needed to overcome them. Get a single hieroglyph wrong, and you might find yourself saying hello to a soul-devouring crocodile god instead of the magic words that would make him let you pass. A divine typo could have eternal consequences. After your approval, the painters apply the color. They use a simple but vibrant palette made from ground minerals: black from charcoal, white from gypsum, red and yellow from ochre, blue from ground lapis lazuli, or a synthetic pigment called Egyptian blue, and green from malachite. In the flickering lamplight, the walls come alive with gods with animal heads, serpents of fire, and boats sailing on subterranean rivers. They paint you again and again, standing in adoration before Osiris, being embraced by Isis, and being offered the Ankh, the symbol of life, by Horus. It is a vision of your divine future, a promise set in stone and pigment. While the tomb is being carved and painted, another army of craftsmen is busy creating your funerary goods. Everything you could possibly need or want in the afterlife must be made and placed in your tomb. This includes gilded chariots, ceremonial beds shaped like sacred animals, thrones inlaid with ivory and ebony, and hundreds of chests filled with linen clothing, jewelry, and cosmetics. Remember that coal you wear every day? You'll need a lifetime supply. There are game boards like Senet to pass the time, musical instruments, and even meticulously preserved food and wine. A quirky but common inclusion was a set of shabdi figures. These were small statuettes, often hundreds of them, inscribed with a spell. The idea was that if you were called upon to do any manual labor in the afterlife, like tilling the fields of Osiris, you could magically command a shabdi to do the work for you. It's the ultimate ancient form of outsourcing your chores. You can take the pharaoh out of the palace, but you can't take the palace out of the pharaoh. Historians still argue about the precise theological purpose of some tomb goods. Were the models of boats and granaries meant to magically function in the next world, or were they symbolic offerings representing your earthly wealth and power? The answer is likely both. The Egyptian worldview did not draw a firm line between the physical and the magical. An object's image could be as potent as the object itself. Your sarcophagus is the centerpiece of this entire operation. It is a masterpiece of stonework, often carved from a single massive block of granite or quartzite, weighing many tons. It takes years to carve and polish, its surfaces covered in protective inscriptions. Inside this, a series of nested coffins will be placed, each more lavish than the last, culminating in the final, innermost coffin, perhaps made of solid gold, that will hold your mummified body. As the years of your reign pass, the work continues. If you live a long life, your tomb can become incredibly large and complex. If you die unexpectedly young, like Tutankhamun, your successors must hastily adapt a smaller, non-royal tomb for your use. The pressure is always on. The thought that you might die before your mansion of eternity is ready is a source of great anxiety. This entire endeavor, the labor of thousands, the wealth of a nation, is focused on a single selfish goal: your personal salvation. While your people toil to build irrigation canals and temples for the public good, the best and brightest are hidden away in a secret valley, painting the walls of your future home. It is the ultimate expression of the disturbing gulf between you and the people you rule. Their lives are short and difficult, while yours is geared entirely towards ensuring you never truly have to die at all. The day comes, as it must, even for a living god. Perhaps it is a sudden illness, a fever that the physician's spells and rodent-based remedies cannot break. Perhaps it is a wound from battle or a conspirator's poison finally doing its work. Or perhaps it is simply old age, your divine body finally succumbing to the gentle, persistent wear of time. Your last breath is not a private, familial moment. It is a cosmic event. As you exhale for the final time, the priests in attendance begin a low, mournful chant. The Horus has flown. The king is dead. But in the Egyptian mind, death is not an end. It is a transition, and a dangerous one. Your Ba, the part of your soul that is your personality and can travel, has flown from your body. Your Ka, your spiritual double or life force, has nowhere to go. The immediate goal is to preserve your physical form so that your Ba and Ka can recognize it and reunite with it in the afterlife, allowing you to be reborn as an eternal being. The long, 70-day process of mummification begins immediately. Your body is taken by boat across the Nile to the West Bank, to a special workshop near your now completed tomb called the Pernefer, the House of Beauty. Here, the chief embalmer, a priest who wears the jackal-headed mask of the god Anubis, takes charge. You are laid out on a sloping alabaster slab. The process is methodical, reverent, and deeply invasive. First, a long, bronze hook is inserted through your nostril. The embalmers carefully, painstakingly, use it to break through the thin ethmoid bone and liquefy your brain, which is then drained out through your nose. The Egyptians believed the brain was just stuffing, the seat of all thought and emotion being the heart. The brain is discarded. It's a humbling thought. All your kingly decisions, your divine thoughts, simply thrown away. Next, a sharp obsidian knife is used to make an incision in your left side. Through this opening, the embalmers reach in and remove your internal organs, the stomach, the intestines, the liver, and the lungs. These are not discarded. They are washed with palm wine, rinsed, and packed in natron to be dried. Each organ is then placed in its own special vessel, a canopic jar, whose lid is shaped like the head of one of the 4 sons of Horus. Your stomach goes in the jar with the jackal head, your intestines with the falcon, your liver with the human head, and your lungs with the baboon. Your heart, however, is left inside your body. It is the center of intelligence and memory, and you will need it for your final judgment. Your empty body cavity is then thoroughly cleansed with wine and spices. After that, it is packed with temporary stuffing, linen, sawdust, anything to hold its shape, and then completely buried in a huge pile of natron, a natural salt harvested from the dry lake beds of the Wadi El Natron. Here you will lie for 40 days. The natron aggressively dehydrates the body, drawing out every last bit of moisture and preventing decay. It is this desiccation, not a secret magical process, that is the key to Egyptian mummification. After 40 days, your body is removed from the natron pile. It is shrunken, leathery, and dark, but perfectly preserved. The temporary stuffing is removed, and your body is washed one last time. The hollowed-out torso is now packed with permanent materials, resins, scented sawdust, and bundles of linen, to restore a more lifelike shape. The incision on your side is sewn up, and a protective plaque, often bearing the eye of Horus, is placed over it. Your skin is anointed with a series of fragrant and expensive oils and resins to make it supple. Finally, the wrapping begins. This is a painstaking process that can take over 2 weeks. Hundreds of yards of the finest linen are used. Each finger and toe is wrapped individually. Then your limbs, then your torso and head. Between the layers of bandages, the priests place dozens, sometimes hundreds, of magical amulets, jed pillars for stability, ankhs for life, scarab beetles for rebirth. A specific scroll containing spells from the Book of the Dead might be placed on your chest. As they wrap, lector priests chant non-stop, reciting the spells that will protect you in the underworld. The final layer is a large shroud, and your mummified head is covered with a golden death mask, a perfect, idealized portrait of you as a divine being. Your body, now a secured and sanctified vessel, is placed into its nest of coffins. The funeral procession is the grandest spectacle the kingdom will see. Your massive sarcophagus, pulled on a sledge by oxen and a team of nobles, makes its slow journey from the embalming workshop to the door of your tomb. Professional mourners, women with their hair disheveled and their bodies caked in dust, wail and cry out, creating a sound of immense public grief. Your successor, the new pharaoh, leads the procession, followed by the priests and the highest officials of the court. At the tomb's entrance, the final and most important ritual is performed, the opening of the mouth ceremony. This is the same ritual you once performed on cult statues. Now it is performed on you. A priest touches your mummy's mouth, eyes, and ears with a set of ceremonial instruments, including an adze shaped like a fish's tail. This magically reanimates your senses, allowing your spirit to see, speak, and eat in the afterlife. Your sarcophagus is then laboriously lowered down the long corridors and into the burial chamber. The vast array of funerary goods is arranged around it. The door to the burial chamber is sealed with stone and plaster, and the workers begin the process of filling the main corridor with rubble to deter thieves. The tomb is sealed, its entrance camouflaged, intended never to be opened again. But this is not the end of your story. Your legacy, which you spent a lifetime building in stone, is now shockingly fragile. Despite the hidden location and the tons of rubble, tomb robbers are a persistent threat. Often they were the very workers who built the tombs, who knew the secret layouts. Within a few generations, sometimes even a few years, your eternal home might be breached. Your treasures would be melted down, your furniture broken up, your name erased. This desecration was the ultimate fear, not just the loss of wealth, but the destruction of your identity and your chance at eternal life. And then there is the slow, silent victory of the sand. Over centuries, the desert winds would bury the entrance to your tomb, hiding it from robbers, but also from memory. Your name, once spoken with reverence across the known world, would fade into myth. Your grand temples would crumble, their stones repurposed by later generations. Your story, once the center of the cosmos, becomes a footnote, a mystery buried beneath the shifting dunes. Historians still argue about the fate of many pharaohs whose tombs have never been found. Are they still lying undisturbed, waiting for a lucky archaeologist, or were they looted and destroyed in antiquity, their mummies torn apart for a few gold amulets? Your long, uncertain sleep is a gamble. You have done everything in your power, marshaled the resources of a nation, and followed the sacred rites to the letter. Now all you can do is wait, hoping that your magic holds, that your tomb remains secret, and that your name will, somehow, be spoken again, ensuring your spirit lives on. Your disturbing life of immense power and stifling ritual has concluded, giving way to an even more disturbing eternity of silence and uncertainty. The strange laws of medieval Europe. Let the world outside your window fade away. Let the gentle weight of your blankets be the only thing you feel, and the sound of my voice the only thing you hear. We are going on a journey, not to a place of grand battles or royal intrigue, but to a quieter, stranger time. A time when the fabric of your clothes and the shape of your shoes were matters of law. Imagine, for a moment, that you are waking up, not to the buzz of an alarm, but to a thin, gray light filtering through a single unglazed window, perhaps covered by a stretched piece of oiled linen or a simple wooden shutter. The air is cool and carries the faint, earthy scent of wood smoke, damp wool, and straw. You push aside a heavy, coarse blanket and sit up on your simple straw-stuffed mattress. The floorboards beneath your bare feet are wide, uneven, and cold. It is time to get dressed, and this is not a simple matter of choosing what you like. It is a matter of law. Your clothes for the day are laid out on a small wooden chest at the foot of your bed. Let's look at them. First, a simple linen undertunic, or maybe a smock. The fabric is a pale off-white, the color of undyed flax. It's a little scratchy but familiar. Over this, you will wear your main garment, a tunic made of wool. Feel the texture in your mind. It's heavy, sturdy, and a little rough to the touch. It smells faintly of lanolin, the natural oil from the sheep. Now consider the color. Your tunic is a dull, earthy brown, the color of dried mud or tree bark. It was dyed with something simple and cheap, like walnut husks. And this is not a choice made for style or personal preference. It is a choice made for you by your station in life and enforced by the authorities. These were the sumptuary laws, a vast and intricate web of regulations designed to keep everyone in their proper social lane. You might glance out your window and see a merchant's wife walking to the market. Her tunic might be a deep green, or perhaps a russet red. These colors required more expensive dyes, like woad or madder, and were therefore permitted for her class, a small step above your own. And then, in the distance, you might catch a glimpse of a nobleman on horseback. His cloak could be a shocking, vibrant scarlet. That color, a fiery red, was fantastically expensive, often requiring imported dyestuffs, and was a clear signal of immense wealth and power. To wear it without the proper rank was a crime. It was like walking down the street today wearing a police uniform when you are not an officer, a lie about your place in the world. And as for the color purple, the legendary Tyrian purple derived from sea snails, well, that was reserved for royalty and the highest echelons of the church. For you to wear it would be an act of near treason. So you pull on your simple, law-abiding brown tunic. It's loose-fitting, practical for a day of work. You cinch it at the waist with a plain leather belt. No silver buckle for you. That's for a knight or a wealthy guildsman. Yours is simple iron or bronze. Attached to the belt is a small leather pouch for a few coins and perhaps a knife. That knife is your all-purpose tool, You'll use it to cut your bread and cheese at lunchtime, to mend a strap, or for protection if needed. You have 10 forks at the end of your arms, as the saying might go, and this one knife. That was considered quite sufficient. Let's turn our attention to your legs. You pull on a pair of woolen hose, which are less like modern socks and more like individual leggings, tied up to your belt or to your linen underbreeches. They are again a drab, serviceable color. Comfort is a secondary concern to practicality and, of course, legality. And now for the shoes. This is where things could get particularly strange. For most of the medieval period, your shoes would be simple leather turn shoes, soft and shaped to your foot. But during the 14th and 15th centuries, a bizarre fashion took hold among the upper classes. Incredibly long, pointed shoes called polanes or crackles. The points could be so long they had to be stuffed with moss or wool to keep their shape, and in extreme cases, they were even tied up to the knee with a small chain to prevent the wearer from tripping. Of course, you are not wearing these. The length of your shoe point was, in some places, legally restricted by your social rank. An English statute from 1463 decreed that no knight, esquire, or gentleman under the rank of a lord could wear shoes with points longer than 2 inches. A commoner, like yourself, was forbidden from wearing them at all. So you put on your simple, round-toed leather shoes. They are practical, they are sensible, and they won't get you a fine for, essentially, excessive stylishness. It was a wonderful system for anyone who hated shoe shopping. Now that you are dressed, you might think about your hair. If you are a man, your hair is likely cut in a simple bowl shape around your ears. Laws in some regions dictated the length and style of hair and beards, associating long, flowing locks with the aristocracy. If you are a married woman, you are required, by both law and custom, to cover your hair in public. You would wrap it in a simple linen wimple or coif, a white cloth that conceals your hair and frames your face. To go out with your hair uncovered would be a sign of being unmarried, or worse, a woman of loose morals. It was a public declaration of your status, as clear as any identity card. The very way you hold your body is subject to unwritten, but powerful rules. As you step out of your small home and onto the muddy street, you must be mindful of who you are and who you pass. If you see your landlord or the local priest, you must avert your gaze, and if you are a man, doff your cap. To look a superior directly in the eye could be seen as a challenge, an act of insolence. Deference was the oil that lubricated the gears of this rigid society. Historians still argue whether these sumptuary laws were primarily about reinforcing the visual social hierarchy, ensuring a peasant always looked like a peasant and a lord always looked like a lord, or if they were more concerned with a kind of medieval economic protectionism, aimed at preventing the nation's wealth from being spent on extravagant foreign silks and furs. Perhaps it was a bit of both, a way to control both the economy and the public imagination. Even the food you planned to eat for your midday meal could be regulated. In some cities, ordinances were passed that limited the number of courses a person of a certain class could serve at a banquet. A commoner might be allowed a soup and one main dish, while a baron could serve 3 or 4. This was partly to discourage wasteful spending, but it was also another way of making class visible. You couldn't just be rich, you had to perform your wealth in legally sanctioned ways. To throw a lavish party above your station was not just showing off, it was a punishable offense. And so you stand in your legally brown tunic and your sensibly short shoes, your hair appropriately covered or cut, a walking embodiment of the law. Every thread, every color, every inch of leather speaks to your place in the great, unmoving chain of being. The law is not just in a book in some dusty courthouse. It is woven into the very fabric of your clothes. It is a quiet, constant weight, a silent companion on your walk to the market, a gentle but firm reminder of who you are and who you are not. And as you walk, you might see a group of young nobles, laughing loudly, their shoe points absurdly long. You might find it comical, a great way to trip your enemies, or, far more likely, yourself on the uneven cobblestones. You shake your head with a quiet smile and continue on your way, perfectly and safely ordinary. You walk on, your sensible shoes making soft sounds on the packed earth of the road. The air grows thicker with the smells of the town, the sharp tang of a tannery, the comforting scent of baking bread from a communal oven, and the ever-present, pervasive odor of livestock. Because in this world, animals are not just property. They are neighbors, and sometimes they are criminals. You see a pig trotting down the middle of the street, snuffling at a discarded cabbage leaf. It's a common sight. Pigs, chickens, and geese wander freely, serving as a sort of organic sanitation department. But this freedom comes with legal responsibilities. If that pig were to, say, wander into a neighbor's garden and devour their prize-winning leeks, its owner would be liable for the damages. That's simple enough. But what if the pig's actions were more serious? This is where the law takes a turn into the truly peculiar. Throughout medieval Europe, there existed a well-documented system of animal trials. It sounds like something from a fantasy story, but it was a genuine and surprisingly common legal practice. Animals could be formally charged with crimes, arrested, held in prison, and put on trial in both secular and ecclesiastical courts. Imagine the scene. A pig is accused of a terrible crime, perhaps of injuring or even killing a small child. A tragically common occurrence when large, powerful animals lived in such close proximity to people. The pig would be arrested and held in the local jail, often in the same cells as human prisoners. The town would then have to pay for its upkeep, food and water for the accused swine. Then comes the trial. The animal would be brought before the court, sometimes dressed in human clothes for the occasion, which is a detail both grim and strangely hilarious. A prosecutor would lay out the case against it, and in the interest of justice, the animal would be appointed a defense lawyer. There are actual court records from France where a lawyer named Bartholomew Chassenny made a name for himself as a brilliant defender of rats. In one famous case, a village sued the local rat population for destroying their barley crop. Chassenny, as the rats' appointed counsel, successfully argued that his clients could not appear in court because the summons was too specific. It was addressed to the rats of one village, but his clients were spread across the entire diocese and hadn't all been properly notified. The case was delayed. Then, when a new court date was set, Chassenny argued that his clients, the rats, could not safely travel to the courthouse because of the known threat of their enemies, the village cats, who would be lying in wait. The court, acknowledging the legitimate peril, could not compel the rats to appear. The case was dismissed. This was a real legal argument, presented with a straight face, in a real court of law. For the pig on trial for a more serious crime, however, the outcome was often less fortunate. If found guilty, it would be sentenced just like a human. The typical sentence was death by hanging. The pig would be taken to the public gallows, and the sentence would be carried out by the town executioner, who would then submit a bill for his services, including the cost of the rope and, in some cases, a new pair of gloves for handling the condemned beast. These public executions served as a powerful, if bizarre, warning to the community about the need to control one's animals. You pass the town square, the site of the market, and also the site where such strange spectacles might unfold. The law, it seems, did not always distinguish clearly between beings with moral reason and those without. A crime was a disruption of God's order, and that order had to be restored, whether the perpetrator was a man or a sow. Leaving the bustle of the town center behind, your path takes you towards the edge of the village, where the neat fields give way to the wild, untamed forest. And here, you encounter an entirely different set of laws, just as strange and far more severe. This is the King's Forest, and it is not the gentle, welcoming woodland of fairy tales. The concept of the forest in medieval law didn't necessarily mean a place full of trees. It was a legal designation. A forest could be heathland, pasture, or even a village. It was any land set aside by the king for his personal hunting pleasure. And forest law was a separate legal code, brutally enforced, that superseded the common law of the land. As you stand at the edge of the woods, you instinctively feel a sense of caution. You are a commoner. You are not allowed in here. To even be found within the boundaries of the forest without a legitimate reason was a crime. To gather fallen branches for firewood? A crime punishable by a fine. To let your own non-criminal pig wander in to eat acorns? A crime called pannage, for which you had to pay a fee. The real danger, however, was in harming the animals that lived within. The forest was the king's private larder and playground. The deer, fallow roe, and especially the noble red deer, the hart, were his exclusive property. To kill a deer was a crime as serious as killing a person. Under the reign of the Norman kings in England, the punishment for poaching a deer was blinding and castration. A poacher was seen as stealing directly from the king's table, a profound act of defiance. Even your dog is a potential criminal here. Forest law dictated that any dog living near a royal forest had to be lawed, or expedited. This involved a gruesome procedure where 3 claws were removed from one of the dog's front paws with a mallet and chisel. The goal was not to lame the dog entirely, but to make it incapable of chasing and bringing down a deer. A forester could legally kill any unlawed dog he found within the forest boundaries. So you stand at the threshold of this forbidden world. You can hear the call of a bird, the rustle of leaves in the wind. It looks peaceful, but you know it is governed by a hidden layer of violent law. You are not allowed to own a crossbow or even a longbow, as they are seen as poachers' weapons. The very act of making a stand or building a blind was evidence of intent to poach. Foresters, the king's enforcers, patrolled these woods, and their word was law. They could levy fines, confiscate property, and inflict summary justice with near impunity. It's a strange contradiction. In the town, an animal might be given a lawyer and the full pageantry of a trial. But out here, in the king's personal domain, a man could be maimed for life for killing a single animal. It shows a society where legal rights were not universal, but were tied inextricably to land and status. The life of a pig that harmed a person in a village was forfeit. The life of a deer that ate a peasant's crops was sacred. Historians debate whether the harshness of the forest law was purely about preserving the king's hunt, or if it was a deliberate tool of political control, a way for a monarch, especially a new one, like William the Conqueror in England, to assert his absolute authority over the land and its people, reminding them at every turn that even the wild spaces belonged not to them or to nature, but to him alone. You turn your back on the forest, that place of silent, looming threat. You are a law-abiding person. You have no desire for venison that could cost you your eyes. You will stick to the path, keep your head down, and maybe later, you'll complain with your neighbors over a cup of small ale about the injustice of it all. But you will do so quietly, because even your words, as you are about to discover, are governed by a complex and costly set of rules. The quiet resolution to keep your complaints to yourself is a wise one. In this world, words have weight, and accusations, once spoken, can set in motion a legal machine that is both terrifyingly random and minutely specific. As you continue your walk, you pass by the small stone church, its heavy wooden door slightly ajar. You can almost feel the cool, incense-scented air wafting out. This building is not just a house of worship. For a long time, it was also a courthouse of a very special kind. It was a place where innocence was not proven with evidence, but tested by God himself. This was the logic of the trial by ordeal. It was a deeply ingrained system, used when there were no witnesses, no confession, and no clear proof. It was a direct appeal to the divine, a belief that God would not suffer an innocent person to be condemned, and would perform a small, timely miracle to prove it. For you, the accused, it meant putting your fate and your body entirely in his hands. Imagine you were accused of a crime, theft, perhaps. Your neighbor claims you stole his silver cup. You deny it vehemently. With his word against yours, the community might turn to the ordeal. You would be brought here, to this church. After days of fasting and prayer, you would stand before the priest and the assembled community. The air would be thick with tension, not of drama, but of profound, silent solemnity. Let's consider the ordeal of fire. The priest would be tending a small brazier, the coals glowing a malevolent orange. In it rests a bar of iron. It is to be your burden. At the right moment, the priest, chanting prayers, would use tongs to lift the glowing, white-hot bar from the fire. Your task is to take it in your bare hands and carry it a set distance, perhaps 9 feet, before dropping it. Picture it in your mind. The searing heat on your palm. The instinctive, screaming urge to drop it, an urge you must suppress. The smell of your own flesh burning. The dead silence of the onlookers as you take those 3 slow, agonizing steps. After you drop the iron, the priest would immediately bind your hand in consecrated cloth and seal it with wax. Then you would wait. For 3 days, you would live in a state of suspense. Your hand would throb with pain. You would eat little, sleep less. At the end of the 3rd day, you would return to the church. The priest would break the seal and unwrap the bandage. Everyone would lean in to look. And here is the moment of judgment. Is the wound festering, blistered, and infected? If so, God has judged you guilty. The mundane reality of a severe burn is taken as a sign of your sin. But if the wound is clean, healing, or miraculously unblemished, then God has intervened. He has protected you. You are innocent. The entire community would celebrate your vindication. Or perhaps the community preferred the ordeal of water. You would be bound, thumb to opposite toe, and a rope tied around your waist. Then, you would be lowered into a pool of water that had been blessed by the priest, rendering it pure. Here, the logic is, to our modern minds, completely backwards. The pure water, it was believed, would reject a sinner. If you floated, you were guilty. The very laws of physics that would save your life were taken as proof of your corruption. If you sank, the pure water had accepted you. You were innocent. The only trick was for the person holding the rope to pull you out before you drowned. It was a system that gave a distinct advantage to those who never learned to swim, which, to be fair, was most people. A successful ordeal of water was, essentially, a near-drowning experience. There were other, less dramatic ordeals. For a priest accused of a crime, there was the ordeal of the coarsened or the cursed morsel. He would have to swallow a piece of consecrated bread or cheese. If it went down smoothly, he was innocent. If he choked or gagged, it was a sign from God that he was lying, and therefore guilty. One can only imagine the sheer anxiety, making it almost impossible to swallow, turning a dry piece of bread into a divine judgment. A very literal case of a lie sticking in one's throat. For centuries, these were accepted methods of justice. But nothing lasts forever. In the year 1215, a great gathering of church leaders called the Fourth Lateran Council made a momentous decision. They forbade priests from participating in or blessing trials by ordeal. Without the church's authority, the system lost its legitimacy. It was a quiet, bureaucratic decision made in Rome, but it fundamentally changed the course of Western law, forcing societies like England to develop new methods of determining guilt and innocence, which would eventually lead to the ancestor of the modern jury trial. But let's say your legal trouble is more straightforward. You had an argument with your neighbor. There's no question of who did what. You lost your temper, and you punched him, knocking out one of his front teeth. There is no ordeal necessary here. Instead, you enter the world of compensatory justice, a system of incredibly detailed fines. This system, known in early Anglo-Saxon England as wergild or man price, and in other forms across Europe, was less about punishment and more about restitution. It was a way to prevent endless cycles of violent revenge. Instead of the victim's family coming to knock out your tooth, you simply had to pay for the damage you caused. And the law codes were stunningly precise about the cost of everything. The laws of King Ethelbert of Kent from the 7th century provide a fascinating price list for the human body. A broken bone had a specific fine. Causing deafness in one ear was worth more than a simple cut. Knocking out a front tooth, as in your case, was worth a certain number of shillings. A molar, being less visible, was worth less. A canine tooth was somewhere in between. Each finger and toe had its own value. The thumb, essential for gripping a tool or a weapon, was worth far more than the little finger. To destroy a man's eye or to cut off his foot would cost a fortune, a significant fraction of the price for killing the man outright. This applied to insults, too. You might hear two merchants shouting at each other in the marketplace. Under some law codes, calling a man a liar or a coward in public carried a specific fine. Slandering a woman's honor was especially costly. Every insult had its price tag. It was a legal system that functioned like a grisly insurance claim form. So, you would not go to jail for punching your neighbor. You would be ordered by the local court to pay him the legally specified price for one front tooth. If you paid, the matter was settled. The feud was over. Justice, of a sort, was done. Of course, this raises a question that is still debated by historians. Did this system truly keep the peace by making violence a costly economic transaction, or did it simply create a world where the wealthy could inflict harm with impunity? Historians still argue whether this system of fines truly reduced violence by making it prohibitively expensive, or if it simply created a society where the rich could literally get away with murder, provided they could afford the bill. If a powerful lord assaulted a peasant, the fine would be a pittance to him, while if a peasant harmed a lord, the resulting debt could ruin his family for generations. Justice, it seems, was never truly blind. It squinted quite a bit, depending on the size of your purse. You find yourself instinctively touching your own teeth, suddenly aware of their value. You resolve to be not just quiet, but exceptionally polite to everyone you meet. You offer a slight nod and a wide berth to the people you pass. In a world of divine trials and itemized fines for injuries, a simple, peaceful day is a treasure beyond measure. It is certainly much cheaper. The sun is beginning to dip lower in the sky, casting long, soft shadows across the cobbled streets and thatched roofs. The day's work is ending, and a new rhythm begins to take hold of the town. This rhythm, too, is dictated by law and custom, a set of rules designed to keep the community safe and orderly through the long, dark hours of the night. You hear a distant, rhythmic clang. It is the sound of the curfew bell. The word curfew comes from the Old French couvre-feu, which means cover the fire. And that was its literal, original purpose. The bell, rung from the church tower or a town gate, was the signal for every household to extinguish or cover their domestic fires for the night. In a town built almost entirely of wood, straw, and wattle and daub, an untended ember could easily lead to a catastrophic fire that could destroy the entire community in hours. The curfew was not a punishment, but a vital, legally enforced act of collective self-preservation. As the bell tolls, you see people beginning to shutter their windows and bar their doors. The marketplace empties out. The streets, which were bustling with life just an hour ago, grow quiet and deserted. To be caught outside after the curfew bell without a legitimate reason, and a lantern was to be assumed a thief, a rogue, or worse. The town watch, a group of local citizens taking their turn at patrol, would be walking the streets, armed with staves and a healthy dose of suspicion. The darkness did not belong to the people. It belonged to the law abiding in their beds, and the lawbreakers in the shadows. You reach your own small home and push open the door, stepping back into the familiar dimness. You secure the simple wooden bar across the door, a comforting, solid sound in the growing twilight. You don't light a candle. They are expensive, made of tallow or beeswax, and a luxury you would save. Instead, you let your eyes adjust to the gloom, the last vestiges of light coming from the single window. Life is governed by these community-wide rules. On Sunday, all work is forbidden. The law of the church is the law of the land. The market is closed, the workshops are silent. To be found working on the Sabbath could result in a fine or a public penance, like being forced to stand in the stocks for the amusement and judgment of your neighbors. These laws structured the very week itself, creating a shared rhythm of labor and rest for everyone. Even the afterlife had its legal and customary tangles. As you settle onto your straw mattress, your thoughts might drift to more somber things. When a person died, their passing was not just a private family affair. It set in motion a series of legal and financial obligations. The most significant of these was the mortuary, or Harriet, in some parts of England. This was a death tax, paid not to the king, but to the local priest and the lord of the manor. The custom dictated that the lord was entitled to the deceased's best beast, their finest ox, their strongest horse, or their plumpest cow. The priest, in turn, was entitled to the second best beast. For a wealthy family, this was an expected expense. But for a poor peasant family, whose livelihood might depend on a single ox for plowing, the loss of that animal could be a devastating, crippling blow. It was a common source of resentment, and is often cited in peasant grievances and rebellions. It was the final tax, the last earthly debt to be paid before your soul could, hopefully, move on. And then there were the superstitions that hardened into strange burial practices. The fear of the undead, of a restless spirit returning to trouble the living, was very real. In some parts of medieval Europe, particularly in Scandinavia and Eastern Europe, archaeological discoveries have revealed what are known as deviant burials. If a person was suspected of being a potential vampire or a revenant, a walker after death, they were not buried in the usual way. They might be buried face down, so that if they tried to dig their way out, they would only dig deeper into the earth. Sometimes a sickle or a scythe would be placed across their neck, the belief being that if they tried to rise, they would decapitate themselves. Others were found with a large stone placed in their mouth to prevent them from gnawing their way out of the grave, or with a stake driven through their heart, pinning them to the earth. These weren't necessarily punishments for crimes committed in life. Often, the first person to die during an epidemic would be a candidate for a deviant burial, out of a desperate, superstitious fear that they would rise to spread the plague to others. This was a fringe practice, to be sure, a dark blend of folklore and fear operating at the edges of official Christian doctrine, but it shows how profoundly the desire for order extended even beyond the grave. The community sought to impose its laws not just on the living, but on the dead as well. It was the ultimate expression of control, an attempt to bind even the supernatural with earthly rules. You pull your wool blanket up to your chin. The night is now completely dark outside your window. The town is silent, save for the distant bark of a dog, hopefully one that has been properly lawed, or the sigh of the wind through the eaves. You are safe in your home, a law-abiding citizen in a world awash with rules, both sensible and strange. You think back on your day, a mental journey through the strange legal landscape of your time. You dressed according to your station, avoiding the crime of wearing the wrong color. You navigated the streets, aware that the pig ambling past you could one day face a judge and jury. You skirted the edge of the king's forest, a place where a deer's life was worth more than a man's freedom. You considered the terrifying prospect of proving your innocence with fire and the oddly practical system of paying for a lost tooth. And now you rest, secure in the knowledge that the curfew keeps the town safe from fire, and that even the dead are bound by their own set of grim regulations. It is a world that seems, to our modern sensibilities, to be a chaotic mix of profound faith, brutal pragmatism, and sheer absurdity. Historians still argue whether the overarching legal principle of the age was the maintenance of a rigid social order, the prevention of feuds through monetary compensation, or a genuine attempt to enact God's will on earth. Perhaps, like the society it governed, it was all three at once, a tangled, contradictory, and deeply human system. But for you, here and now, those are just distant thoughts. The world of laws and trials fades into the background. There is only the darkness, the quiet, and the slow, steady rhythm of your own breathing. There are no more rules to follow today. No fines to pay, no ordeals to face. There is only the gentle pull of sleep, a truly lawless and welcome state. And so you let go, and you drift into the quiet country of dreams. Why medieval castles were death traps. Let the noise of your world begin to fade. Allow the day to dissolve, leaving only the quiet of this moment. We are going back in time, not with the clash of swords, but with a gentle, drifting feeling. We're going to a place of legend, a medieval castle. But we are not here to witness a battle or a banquet. We are here to feel what it was truly like to live within those stone walls, day after day, and to understand why these majestic symbols of power were often, in reality, elaborate, inescapable traps. Imagine yourself standing in the heart of the castle, the Great Hall. It is late afternoon in the grip of a damp, northern autumn. The first thing you notice is not the grandeur, but the cold. It is a profound, penetrating chill that seems to radiate from the very stones themselves. The massive walls, many feet thick, are giant blocks of thermal mass, excellent for stopping a catapult stone, but terrible for holding warmth. In fact, they do the opposite. They seem to hoard the cold, releasing it slowly and steadily, ensuring the air is never truly comfortable. You run a hand along the wall. It's damp to the touch, slick with a fine sheen of condensation. The stone seems to weep, a constant, silent reminder of the dampness that permeates everything. Look up. High above, the soaring ceiling of timber beams is lost in shadow. Light is a precious commodity here. It trickles in through a few tall, narrow windows. These are not vast panes of glass. They are unglazed openings, perhaps covered with stretched, oiled linen or thin sheets of horn, which cast a murky, yellow-brown glow on the scene below. More often, they are just holes, covered by wooden shutters that are either open to the elements or closed to the light. Today, to keep out the biting wind, they are mostly shut. The air itself feels heavy and thick. It carries a complex bouquet of scents. The damp stone, the faint, musty smell of wet wool, and overwhelmingly, the sharp, acrid tang of wood smoke. In the center of the vast hall is the source of both the room's heat and its greatest problem, the central hearth. It is a large, shallow stone pit on the floor where a huge log fire crackles and spits. It is the only source of warmth in this cavernous space, and you instinctively feel drawn towards it. As you get closer, the heat on your face is a welcome relief. But you also notice the smoke. With no chimney as we would know it, the smoke simply billows upwards, seeking an escape. It mushrooms into the high, dark rafters, staining them a greasy, permanent black. Some of it, hopefully, finds its way out through a small, vented opening in the roof called a louvre. But most of it doesn't. It cools, descends, and hangs in the air, a perpetual, eye-stinging haze. Living here means having a constant, low-grade case of smoke inhalation. It was a wonderful preservation technique for the cured meats hanging from the rafters, and perhaps for the lungs of the inhabitants as well. You feel the grit of it on your teeth, the way it catches in the back of your throat. Every surface, including your own skin and clothes, will soon be coated in a fine, greasy layer of soot. This chronic exposure to smoke would have led to a host of respiratory problems, coughs, bronchitis, and worse. It was a slow, invisible hazard, a poison you had to breathe to stay warm. Let's look down at the floor. It is not clean, polished stone. It is covered in a thick layer of rushes, straw, and sweet-smelling herbs. This was the medieval equivalent of wall-to-wall carpeting. In theory, it provided a bit of insulation from the cold stone and a pleasant scent. In reality, it was a sanitary disaster. The top layer might be changed now and then, but the lower layers could remain for years. The great scholar Erasmus, visiting England in the 16th century, famously complained that these floors concealed a collection of spittle, vomit, the urine of dogs and men, beer that has been thrown down, and remnants of fish and other filth that is not to be named. It was, in essence, a slowly composting layer of organic waste right under your feet. You shuffle your feet, and a faint, unpleasant odor rises. This fragrant carpet was a perfect breeding ground for fleas, lice, and bacteria. A life lived in a castle was a life lived with a constant itch. Perhaps you can escape the smoke and cavernous chill of the great hall. You move towards a doorway at the far end, pushing aside a heavy wool curtain. This leads to the private chambers of the Lord and his family, the Solar. Here, things are slightly more comfortable. There are tapestries on the walls, huge, elaborate weavings depicting hunts or biblical scenes. Their brilliant colors are a welcome sight, but their function is as much practical as it is decorative. They are a buffer against the weeping stone, a textile shield against the constant, radiating cold. Historians still argue whether the primary function of these enormous, expensive tapestries was artistic expression, political storytelling, or simply a desperate attempt to invent insulation. In this private room, there is a technological marvel, a proper wall fireplace with a flue and chimney. This is a significant improvement, channeling the worst of the smoke up and out. You stand before it, enjoying its direct warmth. But this innovation creates its own, more subtle problem. The fire draws air to feed itself, pulling it from the room. And where does that air come from? From every crack and gap in the wooden shutters, from under the door, through the very fabric of the castle. This creates a powerful, localized draft. While your front is being toasted by the fire, your back is being chilled by a steady flow of freezing air being sucked into the room. It's a strange paradox. The very thing meant to warm you makes the rest of the room even colder. You notice the bed. It's a large four-poster, shrouded in heavy curtains. Like the tapestries, these are not for privacy or show. They are a necessity. At night, the family would draw these thick curtains to create a small, sealed tent of fabric, trapping their own body heat inside. It was a tiny sanctuary of relative warmth in a vast, cold fortress. It was an admission that they could not heat the room. They could only hope to heat the tiny space in which they slept. The constant, inescapable cold was more than just an inconvenience. It weakened the body's defenses. It made people more susceptible to illness. The dampness encouraged the growth of mold and mildew. A persistent cough was likely the common soundtrack to winter life. The very structure designed to protect its inhabitants from external enemies was, in fact, waging a slow, silent war on their health from the inside. This was not a home. It was a stone shell, a place of shelter, but not a place of comfort. And the greatest dangers were not outside the walls, but locked inside with you. You turn from the relative luxury of the Solar and its drafty fireplace, stepping back into the vast, smoky chill of the great hall. The air still tastes of soot. You find yourself thirsty, a dry, scratchy feeling in your throat. You need a drink of water. This simple, universal need introduces us to one of the most fundamental and perilous aspects of castle life: the water supply. Every castle needed a secure, reliable source of fresh water. It was the single most critical resource, more important than food or weapons. A castle without water could not withstand a siege for more than a few days. The most common solution, and the heart of the castle's viability, was the well. You walk out of the great hall and into the central courtyard, or bailey. The air is fresher here, free from the concentrated smoke, but it carries other scents: the smell of the stables, the forge, and the kitchens. In the center of the bailey, you see it, a stone structure, circular and solid, with a wooden winch mechanism above it. This is the castle well. Its shaft was often dug to an incredible depth, punching down through solid rock to reach the water table, a monumental feat of engineering. The well's location within the main bailey was a crucial defensive feature, ensuring it could not be cut off or poisoned by an attacking force from the outside. A bucket sits on the stone lip. You turn the creaking wooden handle of the winch, lowering the bucket deep into the darkness. The rope plays out and out until finally you hear a distant hollow splash. You begin the slow, arduous task of cranking the bucket back up. It's heavy, and the wet rope is cold in your hands. Finally, the bucket emerges, dripping, full of clear, cold water. It looks perfectly clean, wonderfully refreshing. But it is a deception. The well, for all its strategic importance, was essentially a hole in the ground in the middle of a bustling, self-contained, and not particularly clean town. Think about everything happening in this courtyard. Horses are stabled nearby, their wastes soaking into the ground. There are blacksmiths, tanners using noxious chemicals, and brew houses. There are dogs, chickens, and pigs. And most significantly, there are people. Lots of people. All of their waste, all of the runoff from these activities, slowly but surely leaches into the very ground from which you are drawing your drinking water. While the well might be deep, the water table it draws from is not magically sealed off from the surface. Over time, seepage was inevitable. The water could be teeming with invisible bacteria, typhoid, cholera, dysentery. A drink of clear, cool water from the castle well could be a roll of the dice, a potential death sentence delivered days later in the form of a fever and debilitating illness. Outbreaks of the flux, as dysentery was often called, were common and deadly in the close confines of a castle. But what about human waste? Where did it all go? This brings us to another great innovation of castle design, and another of its great hazards, the garderobe. You leave the well and walk towards the outer wall of the castle. You find a small, unassuming door. Opening it, you step into a tiny, cramped stone chamber. There is no furniture, save for a wooden plank with a hole cut in it, positioned over a shaft that drops away into blackness. This is the garderobe, the castle latrine. It is a significant step up from a simple pit in the ground. The design is clever, a vertical chute built into the thickness of the outer wall, allowing waste to fall directly outside, often into the moat below or onto the rocks at the base of the castle. The name garderobe is wonderfully euphemistic. It translates as warding robes or guarding robes. The working theory, and a wonderfully quirky historical tidbit, is that the ammonia fumes from the urine-soaked shaft acted as a natural moth repellent. People would hang their expensive woolen clothes and furs in the latrine shaft to protect them from insects. It was a combination closet and toilet. It's an elegant, if pungent, example of medieval multitasking. Your finest clothes smelling faintly of latrine was apparently preferable to them being full of holes. But these chutes were not without their problems. They were cold. The wind could whistle up the shaft, making a trip to the garderobe in winter a truly bracing experience. They could become blocked, creating a sanitary nightmare within the castle walls. And they could also be a security risk. There are several recorded instances of attackers using these unguarded sewer chutes to infiltrate a castle. During the Second Barons' War in the 13th century, a force loyal to Prince Edward captured Rochester Castle by sending a small team up a garderobe chute that emptied into the moat, allowing them to open a gate from the inside. A fortress could be brought down by its own toilet. And what about the destination of all this waste? If the garderobe emptied into a dry moat or onto the ground, it created a massive, stinking pile of filth at the base of the walls. This was not only unpleasant for anyone living downwind, but it was also a perfect breeding ground for flies and disease, which could then easily find their way back inside the castle. If it emptied into a wet moat, the situation was little better. A stagnant moat, filled with the combined sewage of several hundred residents, became a giant, circular petri dish. It would be choked with algae, buzzing with insects, and smell absolutely dreadful, especially in the summer heat. This was not the clear, sparkling water of romantic paintings. It was an open sewer. Historians still argue whether the primary design consideration for garderobes was hygiene, getting waste as far away as possible, or defense, as the chutes were often placed on the most sheer, unassailable parts of the wall. Perhaps it was a happy marriage of the two, where the best place to dump sewage was also the hardest place for an enemy to climb. So you stand in this small stone room, a marvel of medieval plumbing. You have a system that protects your clothes from moths and your castle from the immediate presence of filth. But it also creates a potential security breach, a zone of horrific odor, and contributes to the contamination of the very ground your water comes from. The castle is a closed system, and when that system is put under pressure, these seemingly minor issues of water and waste become matters of life and death. The water in the well might look pure, but it is a gamble. The garderobe might be convenient, but it is a vulnerability. The very stones that promise safety and permanence are also the walls of a prison, trapping you with the slow, invisible threats of contaminated water and poor sanitation, day after day, until the inevitable outbreak of disease reminds everyone just how fragile life is within these formidable walls. Leaving the dubious comforts of the garderobe, you make your way back towards the inhabited heart of the castle. The stone passageways are narrow, dark, and uneven. The floors are worn smooth in places, treacherous with dampness in others. You hold a hand against the wall to steady yourself, and the cold, rough stone is a constant companion. Navigating the interior of a castle was a physical skill in itself, a daily negotiation with a structure that was built for defense, not convenience. This brings us to another of the castle's slow, mundane dangers, the simple act of getting around. Let's talk about the stairs. You come to a spiral staircase, tightly wound inside a small circular tower. This is the classic castle staircase, and every aspect of its design is a masterpiece of defensive architecture. First, you notice that it spirals upwards in a clockwise direction. This is a well-known historical fact. The design gave a right-handed swordsman defending the stairs a huge advantage. He would be on the wider part of the step, with his sword arm free to swing, while the right-handed attacker ascending the stairs would be crowded against the central pillar, his sword arm obstructed. It was a brilliant, simple, and deadly piece of planning. But what was good for defense was terrible for daily life. You begin to climb, and you immediately feel the awkwardness. The steps are wedge-shaped, narrow on the inside, wider on the outside. They are also often of irregular height and depth, a feature known as tripping steps. This was another defensive measure, designed to make an armored attacker, unfamiliar with the stairs, stumble and fall. For the residents, however, it meant that every trip up or down the stairs was a memory test. You had to know which step was slightly higher, which was a little shorter. A moment of inattention, especially in the dark, could easily result in a painful tumble. Now imagine carrying something. A heavy bucket of water from the well we just visited, a load of firewood, a platter of food for the Lord's table. The narrow, winding stairs, with their uneven steps, become a genuine hazard. A fall here wasn't just embarrassing, it could be lethal. A broken leg or a head injury in an age without modern medicine was a very serious matter. The castle's own defenses were, in a way, constantly turned against its inhabitants. It was a home that was actively trying to trip you. The lighting or lack thereof made it all worse. The only light in these stairwells came from small, recessed arrow slits, designed to be as small as possible on the outside to prevent an enemy arrow from getting in. They admitted only a sliver of daylight, leaving most of the stairway in a permanent, gloomy twilight. At night, the only option was a torch or a candle, which cast flickering, unreliable shadows that could easily deceive the eye, making the treacherous steps even more dangerous. This, of course, also introduced the constant risk of fire we talked about earlier. Dropping your torch on the stairs could be a far greater disaster than just dropping your dinner. Now, let's consider the living conditions. A castle was not the empty, echoing space we see today. It was a crowded, bustling, and noisy place. The lord and his immediate family might have the relative privacy of the solar, but everyone else, knights, retainers, servants, squires, guests, and various hangers-on, lived in close, constant proximity. You step back into the great hall. Earlier, it was just you and the smoky air. Now, imagine it as it would have been in the evening. The long trestle tables have been set up for dinner. Dozens, perhaps hundreds, of people are crammed onto benches. The noise is immense, a cacophony of conversations, shouting, laughter, and the clatter of wooden plates and metal cups. Dogs weave under the tables, fighting for scraps. The air, already thick with smoke, is now heavy with the smell of unwashed bodies, wet wool, spilled ale, and roasting meat. This was not a place of quiet contemplation. It was more like living in a permanent, rowdy school cafeteria. Privacy was a concept that simply didn't exist for most of the inhabitants. After the meal, the tables would be cleared, and many of the lower-ranking residents would simply wrap themselves in a cloak or a blanket and sleep right there on the rush-covered floor of the great hall. You would be sleeping shoulder to shoulder with your fellow servants and soldiers, surrounded by snores, coughs, and the rustling of your flea-bitten neighbors. This intense, forced proximity was a recipe for social friction. Petty arguments could easily escalate. Grudges could fester. In a highly stratified society where everyone knew their place, slights to one's honor, real or perceived, could lead to tension and violence. A quarrel over a game of dice, an unguarded word, or a dispute over a piece of bread could have serious consequences in an environment where many people were armed. The castle walls that kept enemies out also locked all these internal conflicts in. There was no escape, no way to get away from the people who annoyed you. The psychological toll of this constant, inescapable social pressure must have been immense. Historians still argue whether the hierarchical structure of castle life, with its clear and rigid social order, successfully minimized this conflict by ensuring everyone knew their place, or if it actually exacerbated tensions by constantly reinforcing inequalities. Was it an orderly system or a pressure cooker of resentment? And let's not forget disease. In these crowded conditions, any contagious illness would spread like wildfire. A cough, a fever, the flu, once it got inside the castle walls, it would pass rapidly from person to person. With the dubious water from the well and the less-than-ideal sanitation of the garderobes, an outbreak of something more serious like dysentery was a constant threat that could sweep through the entire population, laying low knights and servants alike. Much like on a modern cruise ship, a stomach bug could take out half the population in a week, only without the benefit of a Lido deck and shuffleboard to pass the time. So, you stand amidst this imagined chaos. The very architecture is a daily obstacle course of treacherous stairs. The social environment is a dense, noisy, and potentially volatile tapestry of human relationships. The air itself is a shared medium for germs. The castle was a paradox, a symbol of security that was filled with internal dangers. It protected you from the armored knight outside the walls, but it offered no defense against a slippery step, a simmering grudge, or the invisible threat of a shared infection. For the average inhabitant, the greatest daily threat was not a catapult, but a cough. The imagined noise of the great hall fades, and we are left once more with the quiet of the stones. We have felt the cold, tasted the smoke, navigated the treacherous stairs, and considered the invisible dangers in the water. These are the daily, grinding realities of castle life. But now, let's consider the moment when a castle's purpose is truly tested, and when all its inherent flaws are magnified 100-fold. Let's imagine the gates are shut. The castle is under siege. From the outside, the castle looks like the ultimate sanctuary. The thick walls, the high towers, the imposing gatehouse, it all speaks of safety and defiance. But for you, inside, the closing of that gate marks the beginning of a slow-motion disaster. The fortress has just become a prison. And the greatest enemy is not the army outside, but time itself. The first thing that changes is the atmosphere. The usual hustle and bustle of the bailey is replaced by a tense, nervous energy. The population of the castle has suddenly swelled. Not just the usual garrison, but also people from the surrounding village who have sought refuge inside the walls, bringing their families and a few precious belongings. The already crowded space becomes crushingly so. Every corner of the castle is now inhabited. The immediate concern is rationing. The lord of the castle, or his constable, would have immediately taken stock of all the food supplies. The granary, the larder, the cellars, every last grain, every salted fish, every cask of ale is counted and guarded. From this moment on, your daily portion of food will shrink. The meals in the great hall, once hearty, become meager. The bread is cut a little thinner each day. The stew is a little more watery. The days turn into weeks. The besieging army is patient. They have no need for a bloody assault. They know the castle's greatest vulnerability lies in its stomach. They are content to wait, to let hunger do their work for them. Inside the walls, the initial tension gives way to a grim, monotonous reality. The conversation is dominated by one topic: food. Your world, which was once the entire surrounding countryside, has now shrunk to the size of this stone enclosure. The view from the battlements is a torment. You can see the fields that you used to farm, the orchards where fruit is ripening on the branch, all tantalizingly out of reach. The enemy soldiers camp in plain sight, cooking their meals over open fires, the smell of their roasting meat drifting up on the wind, a form of psychological warfare more cruel than any taunt. As the food supplies dwindle, the diet becomes desperate. The residents would begin to eat anything. The grain, now scraped from the very bottom of the barrels, is full of weevils and rat droppings. The last of the salted meat is tough and crawling with maggots. You might eat the horses, then the dogs, then the cats. There are grim historical accounts from sieges where the defenders were reduced to eating rats, mice, and even the leather from their own shoes and belts, boiled for hours to create a foul, gelatinous soup. It was a slow, agonizing descent into starvation, and with malnutrition comes disease. A population weakened by hunger is incredibly susceptible to illness. And remember the water from our well, the one in the middle of the crowded courtyard? Now, with hundreds of extra people crammed inside, the level of contamination skyrockets. The risk of an outbreak of typhoid or dysentery becomes a near certainty. A sickness that might have been manageable in peacetime becomes a plague. The latrines, the garderobes, are overflowing. The sanitary situation, already precarious, collapses completely. The castle becomes a stinking, disease-ridden death trap. The famous siege of Chateau Gallard in 1204 provides a harrowing, mainstream historical example. When the French besieged this supposedly impregnable English castle in Normandy, a large number of local civilians sought refuge inside. The English commander, realizing he couldn't feed them, eventually forced them out. The The French army, in a brutal act, refused to let them pass through their lines. This group of over 400 men, women, and children were trapped in the no-man's land between the castle wall and the siege lines. They slowly starved to death in full view of both sides through the harsh winter. It is a grim testament to the cold logic of siege warfare. Even the architecture of the castle can turn against you. The thick stone walls that keep the enemy out also do a remarkable job of containing the stench and the sickness. There is no fresh air. There is no escape. The very thing that defines the castle, its enclosure, becomes its most deadly feature. And what about the besiegers? They are not just sitting idle. They might use catapults and trebuchets to hurl not just stones, but also rotting animal carcasses and human waste over the walls. This was early biological warfare. The goal was not necessarily to kill with a direct hit, but to spread disease and despair, to foul the already contaminated water supply, and to break the spirits of the defenders. Imagine the psychological impact of seeing filth and diseased flesh raining down into the courtyard where you live, eat, and draw your water. Historians still argue whether the primary cause of a castle's fall during a prolonged siege was typically starvation, disease, or a collapse in morale leading to surrender. In truth, the three are so deeply intertwined that it's almost impossible to separate them. Hunger breeds sickness, and sickness and hunger together breed despair. You are now a specter haunting this stone prison. You are gaunt, weak, and likely ill. Your clothes are rags. The camaraderie of the early days has evaporated, replaced by suspicion and fear. A neighbor might steal your meager ration. The social order, once so rigid, begins to fray. The strong prey on the weak. The only law is survival. This is the ultimate paradox of the castle. It is a symbol of endurance that is designed to fail slowly. It is a machine for defense that, when activated, becomes a machine for generating misery and death for those inside it. It is not conquered by a dramatic assault, but by the slow, grinding forces of biology, hunger, thirst, and disease. The proud fortress doesn't fall with a bang, but with a whimper, a final, ragged surrender from a garrison of ghosts. And so you stand in this quiet, ruined place, feeling the echo of that desperation. The drafts you felt earlier are now the breath of starvation. The dampness on the walls is the sweat of fever. The treacherous stairs are a final, insurmountable obstacle for a body weakened by hunger. The medieval castle, that icon of romance and strength, was, in its ultimate test, one of the most miserable places a human being could be trapped. A tomb of stone, where the defenders were often buried by their own defenses. Why Viking women were both feared and oppressed. Let the sounds of your own time drift away. Let the gentle weight of your blankets be the only pressure you feel. We are going to journey to a different world, a place of mist and fjords, of long ships and long nights. We are going to the world of the Vikings. But we are not here for the fury of the raid. We are here for the quiet strength of the hearth. We are here to understand the woman who was its master, a figure both powerful and constrained, feared and, at times, oppressed. Imagine you are standing inside a longhouse. It is the heart of a Viking-age farmstead, somewhere on the coast of Norway. The world outside is a canvas of deep green forests, gray rock, and the steely, restless water of the fjord. But inside, it is a world of shadows and warmth. The building itself is vast, a single, long room like the upturned hull of a ship. Great timber posts, dark with age and smoke, rise to a high, arching roof. There are no windows as we know them, only a few thin slits in the walls that let in slivers of the pale northern light. The air is thick, and it carries the scent of 100 lives being lived. There is the rich, earthy smell of the peat and wood fire, the sharp tang of wood smoke, the aroma of a simmering stew, the faint, oily scent of damp wool, and the underlying, not unpleasant musk of livestock, as the far end of the longhouse often served as a byre for the most valuable animals during the harsh winter. The only real source of light comes from the long, rectangular fire pit that runs down the center of the hall. The flames leap and dance, casting flickering, golden light on the faces of your family and retainers, and sending a column of smoke upwards. Most of it, you hope, will find its way out through a simple hole in the roof directly above. The rest hangs in the rafters, a permanent, breathable haze that stings the eyes but keeps the insects down. A Viking air purifier, of a sort. You are the mistress of this place, the Husfrija. And this is not a title of meek domesticity. It is a title of command. Feel the weight at your hip. Hanging from an ornate brooch on your tunic, or from a belt of decorated leather, is a cluster of keys. They are not small and delicate. They are heavy, forged from iron or cast in bronze, intricate in their design. They jingle softly as you move, a constant, subtle announcement of your status. These are not just keys. They are your badge of office, the symbol of your absolute authority within this domestic sphere. These keys unlock the very heart of the household's wealth and survival. One key opens the heavy wooden door to the pantry, the storehouse packed with barrels of salted fish, smoked meat, dried grains, and tubs of butter. You alone are responsible for managing these resources, for making them last through the long, dark, hungry winter. You decide the daily rations. You plan the brewing of the ale and the baking of the bread. Another, more ornate key unlocks the heavy chests that line the walls. These chests don't just hold spare blankets. They contain the family's portable wealth, intricately woven textiles, silver arm rings, foreign coins from a distant raid or trade mission, amber beads, and perhaps a finely decorated sword passed down through generations. This is the family's bank account, and you are the banker. Not even your husband would dare to open these chests without your consent. Your keys are the original keychain of power, and your authority here is understood and respected by all. Your domain extends far beyond food and treasure. Look around the longhouse. It's the original open-plan living concept, just with more drafts and fewer kitchen islands. Along the walls are raised wooden platforms that serve as benches for sitting and working during the day, and as beds for sleeping at night. You are responsible for the health and well-being of every person who sleeps here. Your children, your elderly relatives, and the thralls, the enslaved people who work on the farm. You are the resident doctor, relying on a deep knowledge of herbal remedies to treat a fever, a wound, or a difficult birth. At one end of the hall, you can see the great warp-weighted loom. It is a simple but massive frame, leaning against the wall. From it hang dozens of threads, each one kept taut by a carefully shaped stone or clay weight. Here, you and the other women of the household spend countless hours, your hands moving with practiced skill, spinning raw wool into thread and weaving that thread into the strong, warm cloth needed for sails, blankets, and tunics. The rhythmic clack-clack of the weaving sword beating the weft into place is the steady heartbeat of the longhouse. It is your industry that clothes your family and equips the ships for their journeys. While the stereotype of the Vikings often paints them as rough and dirty, the archaeological record tells a different story, a story you live every day. Excavations of Viking graves, especially female ones, have uncovered a surprising number of personal grooming items. You likely own a finely carved comb made of bone or antler, tweezers for plucking stray hairs, and even a delicate ear spoon for cleaning your ears. Personal hygiene was a point of pride. An English chronicler from the 13th century, John of Wallingford, complained that the Danish Viking men were far too popular with English women precisely because they combed their hair daily, bathed every Saturday, and changed their clothes frequently. This cleanliness was part of the well-managed household that you commanded. And for much of the year, you commanded alone. The very word Viking describes an activity, not just a people. To go a Viking meant to go on a journey, whether for raiding, trading, or exploration. When the ships left in the spring, a significant portion of the farm's able-bodied men went with them. They could be gone for months, even years. In their absence, your authority was not just domestic, it was total. You became the sole manager of the farmstead. You directed the thralls in the fields, oversaw the planting and the harvest, negotiated trade with visiting merchants, and settled disputes with your neighbors. You were the law. Yet, there is a nuance here that is important. Historians still argue whether this authority granted to the Husfrija was a truly independent power, an inherent right of women, or if it was a form of deputized command, an authority loaned to her by her husband, to be rescinded the moment his ship appeared back in the fjord. Was your power your own, or were you simply a steward, holding things in trust for the man who was the ultimate owner? The sagas and law codes are ambiguous, suggesting a reality that was likely complex and varied from family to family, region to region. For now, you stand by the central fire, feeling its warmth on your face. The keys at your belt feel solid, real. The sounds and smells of the longhouse are the sounds and smells of your kingdom. It is a realm of immense responsibility, a world of constant, demanding work. But it is a world where your word is law, your skills are essential, and your authority is unquestioned. You are the anchor of this world, the still point around which the chaotic life of the Viking Age revolves. You move away from the warmth of the fire, the heavy keys at your belt a familiar, comforting weight. Your authority within these wooden walls is secure, a kingdom in miniature. But what happens when you step outside the longhouse door? What is your place in the wider legal and social landscape of the Viking world? Here, the picture becomes more complex, a fascinating mixture of surprising autonomy and rigid constraint. Imagine you are standing in a field, the spring sun just beginning to warm the damp earth. In the distance, a gathering is taking place. It is the local assembly, the Thing. This was the central institution of Viking Age law and politics, a meeting of all the free people of the district to settle disputes, pass laws, and make important community decisions. You see the men of your community gathering, leaning on their spears and shields, their voices carrying on the clear air. But you are not among them. As a woman, you cannot speak at the Thing. You cannot vote. You cannot act as a judge or a law speaker, the respected elder who recited the laws from memory for the assembly. The public, political, and legal spheres were, for the most part, the exclusive domain of men. Your husband or your son might go to represent your family's interests, but you have no direct voice. Your power, symbolized by your keys, is primarily domestic. Once you cross the threshold of your home, it diminishes significantly. This is the central paradox of your life. You hold immense responsibility, but you lack public authority. Yet, the law was not entirely a man's world. In some respects, it offered you protections and freedoms that were quite radical for the time, far exceeding those of women in many other parts of contemporary Europe. Let's consider the foundation of your life here, your marriage. It was not a religious sacrament, but a practical, legal contract between two families. And it was a contract that you, as the woman, could dissolve. The right to initiate a divorce is one of the most striking features of Viking law. The grounds for it were surprisingly broad. If your husband was abusive, if he failed to provide for the family, or even if he was impotent, you had the right to declare yourself divorced. The process, as described in the sagas, was quite formal. You would need to call witnesses, first to your bedside, and then to the main door of the longhouse. There, you would publicly declare yourself divorced from your husband, stating your reasons clearly. And with that, the marriage was legally over. It was a clean break. The concept of asking for your husband's permission or a court's permission didn't really exist. It was your right. And perhaps to make sure everyone got the message, one law code mentions that a husband insulting his wife by wearing effeminate clothing was also grounds for an immediate divorce. The Vikings, it seems, had very specific ideas about fashion and marriage. Upon divorce, you would be entitled to take your dowry back, the wealth your family provided at the start of the marriage, as well as your personal property, and often a share of the wealth accumulated during the marriage. This gave you a degree of economic independence that was almost unheard of elsewhere. You were not left destitute. You could, in theory, return to your own family with your wealth intact, ready to start a new life. This right to divorce and property was a double-edged sword. While it offered you a level of protection and autonomy, your marriage itself was often not your choice. Marriages were alliances, tools for building power, settling feuds, and consolidating land. You were a critical piece in this strategic game played by the men of your family. Your father or brother would arrange your marriage to a man from a family with whom they wanted to forge a bond. Your personal feelings on the matter were rarely a primary concern. Love was a happy accident, not a prerequisite. You were a political pawn, a peace weaver. Your marriage a thread used to bind two powerful families together. Your personal freedom was subordinate to the needs and ambitions of your clan. And then there is the matter of inheritance. Viking law codes, like the famous Icelandic Gragas or Grey Goose laws, clearly state that both sons and daughters could inherit property from their parents. This was a significant departure from many other European legal systems where primogeniture, inheritance by the firstborn son, was the rule. However, sons typically inherited twice the share of daughters. So, while you had a legal right to inherit land and wealth, it was not an equal right. The system was designed to keep the majority of the family's core property, the ancestral farmland, in the male line. You might inherit a smaller, separate farm, or more likely, portable wealth like silver, livestock, or textiles. This legal status created a complicated reality. You could own property. You could run a farmstead. A widow in particular could wield enormous power, controlling her late husband's estate until her sons came of age. There are many saga accounts of formidable widows who became the powerful matriarchs of their families, steering their clan's fortunes with a firm hand. They were respected, and at times feared. But your legal personhood was often tied to the men in your life. An unmarried woman was under the legal guardianship of her father or brother. A married woman was under the legal authority of her husband. For any major legal transaction, like selling land you had inherited, you would often need the consent of your male guardian. Insults or injuries against you were also a family matter. If someone slandered your name or assaulted you, the compensation, the wergild or man price, was paid not to you, but to your husband or father. The offense was seen as a crime against his honor, a stain on the family's reputation that had to be cleansed with a payment of silver. Historians still argue whether the legal rights afforded to Viking women, such as divorce and inheritance, represent a surviving legacy of a more egalitarian Germanic tribal past, or if they were simply pragmatic adaptations to the realities of Viking society, where men were often away for long periods, necessitating a legally empowered female head of household. Was it a matter of ideology or a matter of practicality? The answer is likely a bit of both. So you stand in your field, watching the distant meeting of men. You are both central to the survival of your world and peripheral to its public power structures. You are a property owner who cannot speak in court. You are a master of a household who is likely bartered into that role like a prize mare. You have the power to end your marriage, but you may not have had the power to begin it. Your life is a tapestry woven with threads of surprising freedom and unyielding constraint. You are not a simple figure. You are a paradox, a testament to a society that was far more complex than the simple stereotypes of bearded axemen would have us believe. You turn your back on the distant assembly of men, the legal world with its frustrating and fascinating contradictions, and walk towards the wilder edges of your farmstead. The neatly cultivated fields give way to rocky outcrops, tangled woods, and the deep, silent shadows of the forest. It is here, in the liminal spaces between the tamed and the untamed, that we find another aspect of your power, one that is not based on keys or laws, but on the unseen world of spirits, fate, and magic. In this world, the line between the natural and the supernatural is thin, almost non-existent. The gods Odin, Thor, Freya are not distant, abstract beings. They are active participants in the world. And fate, or WIRD, is a powerful, almost tangible force, a thread spun for every person at birth by the Norns, the Norse weavers of destiny. While fate's grand design was set, it was believed that certain individuals had the ability to glimpse its pattern and perhaps even to influence it. Many of these individuals were women. You might be one of them. Perhaps you are known in your community as a Volva, a seeress or prophetess. This was not a role of a village eccentric, but a position of immense honor and fear. A Volva was a powerful, often itinerant figure who would travel from farm to farm, offering her services to communities desperate for knowledge of the future. The most detailed description of such a woman comes from the saga of Eric the Red, a famous Icelandic text. The seeress described their arrives at a starving Greenland settlement wearing a striking blue cloak, a hood lined with white catskin, and carrying a staff adorned with brass knobs. She is treated as an honored guest, given a special seat and a special meal made from the hearts of all the animals available. This was not a woman to be trifled with. As a Volva, your practice would center on a ritual known as seer. It was a complex and powerful form of magic, believed to have been taught to the gods by the goddess Freya herself. To perform the ritual, you would mount a special platform or high seat. From there, surrounded by a circle of young women chanting special songs to summon the spirits, you would enter a trance state. In this altered state of consciousness, you would commune with the spirit world, seeking answers to pressing questions. Will the harvest be good? Will the coming winter be harsh? Will the ships return safely from their voyage? The community would hang on your every word, your cryptic, chanted pronouncements shaping their decisions for the year to come. This power was deeply respected, but it was also dangerous. The practice of seer was seen as somewhat unmanly, and while Odin himself was a master of it, male practitioners, or Simon, were often viewed with suspicion and scorn. For a woman, however, it was a source of immense influence, a form of authority that operated entirely outside the male-dominated legal structures of the thing. It was a power that came directly from the gods and the spirits, and it could not be easily challenged by earthly authority. A Jarl might command 100 warriors, but even he would listen carefully to the words of the Volva. But magic, like the law, was a double-edged sword. While the respected Volva practiced her craft for the good of the community, there were others who were believed to use magic for darker purposes, to curse enemies, to cause illness, or to shapeshift into monstrous beasts. A woman skilled in the magical arts could just as easily be accused of being a malevolent sorceress as she could be revered as a wise prophetess. To have a reputation for magical knowledge was to walk a fine line between honor and persecution. Remember the old saying, it's only a miracle if you like the person doing it. For everyone else, it's just showing off, or worse, dark magic. And now we must address the most enduring and most controversial image of the powerful Viking woman, the shield maiden, the skjoldmur. For centuries, the idea of women fighting alongside men in the Viking Age was dismissed by scholars as a literary fantasy, a romantic invention of the saga writers. The sagas are full of them, fierce, noble women who take up sword and shield, often outshining their male counterparts in battle. But these were seen as just that, stories. Then, archaeology began to complicate the picture. For decades, one of the most lavish and significant Viking warrior graves ever discovered, from a 10th century site at Birka in Sweden, was assumed to be that of a high-ranking male military commander. The grave was packed with weapons, a sword, an axe, a spear, 2 shields, and the skeletons of 2 horses, all clear indicators of a warrior's burial. But in 2017, a DNA analysis of the skeleton turned the academic world on its head. The bones belonged to a woman. The discovery of the Birka female warrior ignited a firestorm of debate. Was she truly a warrior, a real-life shield maiden? Or was her burial merely symbolic? Were the weapons a sign of her family's status, not her own profession? The evidence is tantalizing but not conclusive, and she is not entirely alone. Other female graves have been found containing weapons, though none as spectacular as the Birka burial. The Byzantine historian John Skylitzes, writing about a battle in 971 AD, mentions that among the fallen Norse warriors, the victors were shocked to discover armed women. So, where does that leave you? Could you have been a warrior? The evidence is thin, but it is no longer zero. It is possible that in the chaotic, violent world of the Viking Age, the lines were sometimes blurred. A woman might have had to take up an axe to defend the longhouse when the men were away. Perhaps some women, though rare, chose the warrior's path for themselves. The debate among historians is intense and ongoing. Historians still argue whether the shield maiden was a genuine, if rare, historical reality, or a powerful cultural myth that reflected the society's respect for female strength and spirit, even if it didn't translate to the battlefield. The truth is, we don't know for sure. The shield maiden exists in that same misty space as the Volva, a figure of immense power whose reality is shrouded in the ambiguities of myth and archaeology. She is a possibility, a potent symbol of what a Viking woman could be. So you stand at the edge of the woods, a place of magic and mystery. You are a figure of immense spiritual authority, a channel for the gods. You are also perhaps a warrior, your strength not just in your will but in your sword arm. Or maybe these are just stories told about you, reflections of the inner strength that everyone knows you possess. Whether you are a seeress, a sorceress, or a shield maiden, you represent a kind of power that transcends the ordinary. You are feared not for your keys, but for your connection to the unknown, for the strength that is not defined by law, but by spirit. The shadows of the forest begin to lengthen, and you turn back towards the familiar sights of the farmstead. The worlds of law and magic, with all their power and peril, swirl around you. But the world is changing. A new faith is spreading across the north, carried by missionaries, merchants, and kings who see it as a tool for consolidating their power. This new religion, Christianity, will profoundly reshape your world, and with it, your role as a woman. You see a small, newly built wooden church standing on a hill overlooking the fjord. It's a simple structure, not much larger than a storehouse, but its form is starkly different from the long, low shape of the longhouse. It has a tall, peaked roof, and on its gable, a simple wooden cross stands in silhouette against the pale sky. This building represents a fundamental shift in the cosmology of your people, and it will have very real, very tangible consequences for your life. As Christianity took root in Scandinavia, generally from the 10th to the 12th centuries, it brought with it a new set of laws and a new social structure, one heavily influenced by the patriarchal traditions of the Roman and Southern European world. The local thing, the assembly of free men, was gradually replaced or subsumed by the authority of the king and the church. And with this new authority came new rules for women. The right to divorce, that remarkable and radical freedom you once possessed, was one of the first things to go. Under Christian law, marriage was a holy sacrament, a bond made before God that could not be broken by a simple declaration at the longhouse door. Divorce became nearly impossible to obtain, requiring a special dispensation from a bishop, which was rarely granted. The escape hatch was sealed. A woman was now bound to her husband for life, for better or for worse, whether he was a good man or a cruel one. The church also frowned upon the informal, contract-based nature of Viking marriage, insisting on a public ceremony blessed by a priest. This brought marriage firmly under the control of the religious authorities. The old traditions, where a couple could be considered married simply by a public agreement and exchange of gifts, were swept away. Your spiritual authority also came under direct attack. The Valva, the seeress who communed with the old gods and spirits, was rebranded by the new faith as a witch. Her practice of seer was no longer seen as a sacred connection to the divine, but as demonic sorcery. The new laws driven by the church condemned magic in all its forms. The reverence and fear you once commanded as a seeress would now be replaced by persecution. The Valva's staff would be broken, her chants silenced, her influence eradicated. The world of spirits was being paved over, replaced by a singular god with a male-only priesthood. Even your appearance began to change. The proud, public display of your status through ornate brooches and keys gradually faded. Christian ideals of female modesty began to take hold, encouraging more subdued dress and, in some cases, the covering of a married woman's hair, a practice common in the rest of Christian Europe. Remember the uncovered hair of the maiden and the wimple of the wife in other parts of medieval Europe? That distinction, once foreign, began to arrive in your world. The legal and economic ground shifted beneath your feet. While you did not lose all property rights, the church's influence often reinforced the male line of inheritance. The Old Norse flexibility was gradually eroded by a more rigid, codified legal system that placed women in a more subordinate, protected, but less powerful position. The formidable, independent Viking widow, managing her own vast estate, slowly transformed into the more constrained medieval noblewoman, her lands often managed by a male relative or a new husband. But even as these traditional sources of power were being curtailed, another aspect of your identity endured and even flourished: your role as a traveler and a settler. The Viking Age was an age of expansion, and you were not just passively waiting at home. Women were an integral part of the Norse expansion across the North Atlantic. Archaeological evidence from settlement sites in Iceland, Greenland, and even the short-lived colony at L'Anse aux Meadows in Newfoundland, Canada, confirms the presence of women from the very beginning. Spindle whorls and loom weights, the small, durable tools of your textile work, are found in the earliest layers of these colonial sites. These artifacts are as clear a sign of your presence as any sword or axe. You were not an afterthought, a mail-order bride, sent for once the men had established a foothold. You were a pioneer. Imagine the journey. You stand on the deck of a nar, a sturdy, wide-beamed cargo ship. It smells of tar, wet wool, and the sea. The ship is packed with your family, your livestock, your household goods, and the disassembled frame of a new longhouse. You watch the familiar coastline of Norway recede into the mist, your destination an unseen land known only from the stories of other sailors. Iceland, the land of fire and ice. It was a perilous journey across hundreds of miles of open, storm-tossed ocean, navigated only by the sun, the stars, and the flight of seabirds. This was not a trip for the faint of heart. It was a journey into the unknown, a testament to your courage and resilience. You were essential to the success of these new colonies. You brought with you the cultural knowledge, the farming techniques, and the textile skills needed to build a new society from scratch. You were the one who knew how to make the butter and cheese, how to preserve food for the winter, and how to turn the wool of a newly birthed lamb into a warm cloak. Without you, these settlements would have been nothing more than temporary camps. With you, they became new homes, new centers of Norse culture that would last for centuries. A fun, fringe tidbit of genetic research supports this story. Studies of the modern Icelandic population show that while a majority of the male line ancestry is Norse, a significant portion of the female line ancestry is from the British Isles, suggesting Viking men often picked up wives, consensually or not, on their travels before settling in Iceland. You might even have been one of those women, swept up in the tide of Norse expansion. So, as we leave this world, we are left with a final, complex portrait. You are the mistress of the longhouse, your keys a symbol of your domestic power. You are a legal entity with the shocking right to divorce, yet you are also a pawn in the games of family alliance. You are a seeress who channels the gods, a figure of immense spiritual power that will later be condemned. And you are a traveler, a colonist, a founder of new nations. Historians still argue about the ultimate legacy of the Viking woman. Was she a proto-feminist icon, an example of pre-Christian gender equality? Or was she a deeply embedded part of a patriarchal warrior society, her freedom simply a pragmatic byproduct of that society's needs? The truth, as always, is likely somewhere in between. Your story is not one of simple freedom or simple oppression. It is a story of nuance, of power held in one hand and surrendered with the other. You were feared for your strength, your spiritual power, and your resilience. And you were oppressed by the expectations of your family, the limitations of the law, and the inexorable tide of religious change. You were, in essence, as complex and as formidable as the landscape you inhabited. And now, in the quiet of this moment, you can let that world of mist and memory fade and simply rest.